Tatsuya Nagamine has played a monumental role in the modern-day landscape of anime. He was a director who is not only known for playing a pivotal part in revitalizing two of the most influential anime series to ever exist, but was also an incredibly creative force that would bring out the best in all of the people around him. This is the story of anime director Tatsuya Nagamine. Our story begins in 1995. Nagamine, who is in his mid-20s at this point, was just about to graduate from the Nihon University College of Art. And just like many other college students, Nagamine was hungry for a job, though unfortunately, he wasn't finding much luck.
I was thinking of becoming a commercial cameraman, but I couldn't find a job at all, even though I was just about to graduate. In the midst of this, I started to realize that I didn't really have the physical strength to be running around with a heavy camera in a tough shooting site, and I started to feel despair. But then I saw the job offer for a desk job with a monthly salary of 180,000 yen from Toei Animation on the school's job hunting board, so I applied for the job offer and I managed to get it.
Toei is where Nagamine would spend the rest of his career. However, despite how acclaimed he is as a director today, he actually wouldn't work as a director until much later during the mid-2000s, which according to him was mostly due to his own lack of skill and experience in animation. Despite this, he would eventually find himself in the director's chair for several different anime. One of the first things he directed was Interlude, an OVA based on the Dreamcast game of the same name. And from here, he would begin to branch out and assume the director position for anime that were actually fairly big IPs for Toei. Anime like Heartcatch Precure, Saint Seiya Omega, and even Digimon Savers the movie, Ultimate Power, Burst Mode, and Invoke. And it's here that we can begin to see his talents as a director begin to blossom, most notably his knack for directing action. At this point, things were going pretty well for him. He had a consistent job at Toei and was getting to work on some of their big shows. However, Nagamine had ambitions that went well beyond just doing pretty well. He had a specific goal in mind. That goal was to work on One Piece, something he had wanted ever since Toei began production on the anime in 1999.
Around that time, Toei started to produce an anime adaptation of One Piece. In the end, I didn't get involved in the production of One Piece for up to 10 years, but during that time, I trained and developed my skills, thinking that one day I would be able to work on One Piece. And finally, that day came and I was able to work on the One Piece Film Z movie.
One Piece Film Z is where Nagamine was really able to let himself shine as a director. Naturally, I mean, he had been wanting to work on the series for 10 years. However, Film Z at the same time was also kind of a nightmare for him.
I love the manga. I've been reading it since its release. Of course, I enjoyed reading it, but while I was directing One Piece Film Z, I started rereading about the 60 volumes that were already published at the time as part of my job. I realized that it was going to be quite a challenge. I was overwhelmed by the hard work and talent of the author, which I wasn't able to fill when I was just reading the books as a fan. There, I fell into despair with the pressure of making the film that I became bedridden.
Despite the fact that it was his status as a fan that was causing him so much anxiety, it was also his dedication as a fan that pressured him to make something truly exceptional. And to this day, One Piece Film Z is still considered one of the best One Piece films. And soon, Nagamine would begin to work on even more of Toei's biggest hitting projects. Projects that would not only solidify him as a spectacular anime director, but someone who would actually change Toei Animation for the better. And this would all begin with the release of Nagamine's next film, Dragon Ball Super Broly. Before this film, Nagamine had already worked on Dragon Ball Super. Specifically, he served as co-director along with Ryota Nakamura on the Tournament of Power arc. And fans were quick to point out just how improved these episodes were from the earlier days of Dragon Ball Super, which was memed on quite a bit. However, Dragon Ball Super Broly is where everything changed. This film was a massive deal, not only because it was reintroducing Broly as a canon Dragon Ball character, but also just because of how good it was. It was actually quite a bit like Film Z in that it was an awe-inspiring spectacle surrounding an emotional core centered on its main villain. And what certainly helped things was this movie's striking art style, a style that probably looks pretty familiar if you're a fan of One One Piece, because the same style would be carried over to Nagamine's next directorial project, the Wano Arc. An arc that many consider to be one of the best to ever come out of the anime. Something to keep in mind about Toei at this point is that a good number of their big TV anime had this kind of homogenized style with animation that wasn't particularly spectacular but got the job done. You know, people obviously still loved series like Dragon Ball and One Piece, and there were moments where the animation did stick out, but for the most part, it was never really anything to write home about. However, Nagamine wanted the One Piece anime to be special. He wanted it to be a pillar of quality in the anime industry, and the way he would go about doing this was to bring as many talented individuals as he could onto the project. People like Akihiro Ota, Vincent Chanzard, Megumi Ishitani, Henry Thurlow, and many others. In addition to this new bold art style, there was also much more of an effort to deliver stellar animation on a fairly consistent basis. And Nagamine made it a priority to make working on this anime as fun and as satisfying as possible for his staff.
結局なんか、僕ワンピースのシリーズディレクターやるにあたって思ったのが、昔僕お邪魔女のレビっていう作品をやってたんですよ。その時にね、佐藤純一監督とか関宏明プロデューサーとかがね、ちゃんとしっかりした枠を作って、その中で遊ばしてくれたんですよ。ちゃんと枠で。その中で自由にやりなっつって、ワノ国のシリーズディレクターになった時に、そうしようかなと思いまして。で、枠に関しては小田先生が原作で枠があるので、その枠の中でこっちのシリーズディレクターとしてその制限しないで、まあサポートはするけれども、中で遊んでよって感じでやって、でまあルックはまあ見た目ちょっと良くして、でみんながその見てる人がルック良くなったなと思ったところを餌にして、そういう才能が集まってくるのをこう待ってたわけですよ。そしたらヴィンセント来るわ、石谷さん来るわで、もういろんな世界中からこうワンピースやりたい人が来る。
It's clear that Nagamine cared immensely not just for this show, but for all the people that worked on it as well. And that care and dedication would go on to pay off tremendously. In this day and age, the One Piece anime is seen as one of the gold standards and is constantly being talked about by fans on social media. At the 2023 Crunchyroll Awards, when One Piece won Best Continuing Series, Nagamine had this to say.
One Piece usually gets nominated to these things, but never receives anything. All the staff work very hard to turn this wonderful title into an anime to deliver to our fans. Quite often, it's difficult to visualize and recognize that effort.
And now, thanks to the hard work put in by Nagamine and all the people he worked with, that effort was recognized. Eiichiro Oda, the creator of One Piece, even made it a point to say how much he loved the Wano arc in the anime, even being driven to tears by it.
Recently, I found myself tearing up whenever I watch an episode of the One Piece anime. They've really nailed the wondrous and fun aspects of Wano. I'm so grateful for their fantastic production.
Nagamine was a director that people could not wait to see what he would be doing next. Unfortunately, though, that day would never come. In the summer of 2025, Tatsuya Nagamine would tragically pass away at the age of 54 from an undisclosed illness. A memorial would be held for him at Toei Animation, where many of his co-workers who worked under him would come to pay their respects. Ever since the news broke out, there's been an outpouring of love not only from Toei, but from all the fans that loved his work. Nagamine's impact on Toei Animation was gargantuan. He was someone that wanted to see his staff be the best version of themselves they could possibly be, and would also look out for more of the inexperienced workers as well.
Nagamine-san was someone who strongly encouraged giving directing roles to the younger staff one after another. And despite having surely been made to do assistant work for a long time himself, he would say things like, don't make them do assistant work for years, and take responsibility on himself, standing firm and giving a push on their backs like, I'll handle the responsibility, so just go ahead and give it a try for now.
He was critical in not only improving the overall quality of two of Toei's biggest anime, but also helping to heighten the ambitions that the staff who work on these shows now have. Despite the fact that Nagamine would leave both of these series after Broly and Wano respectively, they never devolved back to the state they were in before he was involved. As we can see with stuff like Dragon Ball Super Superhero, Dragon Ball Daima, and the Egghead arc of One Piece, these series are now more willing than ever to try and impress their fans, and are also trying to experiment with different kinds of animation. This is the legacy that Tatsuya Nagamine has built. And despite the fact that he's no longer with us, his legacy will continue to live on. Not only through those at Toei, but through the fans as well.